Hello, this is Liberty Mark 222. I haven't made a video in a while, but I'm making one right now. I had listened to this Stefan Molyneux, who I really like, actually. I think he's a really interesting speaker. But he had a video about, it says the title was Satan is the Ruler of the World, and he talked with this Christian, and he said a few things that really bothered me. He was trying to get this Christian to, because Stephen doesn't believe in God. He calls him the spook in the sky and, ghost and all sorts of. He kind of makes fun of God in that way, which actually kind of disturbs me. But so this guy was trying to tell him about like Stephen was saying how the great flood in the Bible is unjust. He accuses God of murder. He says that God killed these innocent children in the flood, babies in the womb, whatnot. And this man was trying to explain to him what the Christian position was exactly, and he didn't do a very good job, unfortunately. And I'm not sure I can do much better. But the way that Stephen Molyneux was framing the whole thing it's not the way that Christians look at the situation at all. I was looking at it, and the way first of all, to look at the whole issue of like the flood, of judgment, God judging the world, of killing everybody except for 8 people in Noah's family. You have to start with the issue of sin, and that's in the Garden of Eden, where God, to get the perfect the perspective that the Christians have, you have to look at what happened in the Garden of Eden. In the Garden of Eden, and I don't look at this as some kind of allegory. I look at it as Adam, the man that God created, and Eve, who he created out of Adam's side, or his rib, whatever. These are actual people. Genetically, it's proven that there was an Eve, that there's one woman that all the genetics come from humans. And so we have an actual Adam, an actual Eve. There was an actual Garden of Eden that God created somewhere in the Middle East, and there was a tree called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and God told him not to eat of that tree. He says, the day that you eat of it, you will surely die. And then there was a serpent that tempted Eve and said, you will not die, but you will become gods, knowing, good and evil. And so Eve ate that fruit, and then she gave fruit to Adam, and he ate it. And then they both realized they were naked. And then they got fig leaves and sewed them together and covered themselves. And then they hid from God. And then God came to him, and he came in the garden. He says, Adam, where are you? And he says, I'm here. And the God says, why are you hiding from me? He says, have you eaten of this tree of the knowledge of good and evil? And he said, the woman gave it to me. And then God asked the woman, and she says, the serpent tempted me. And so then he cursed him, and he said, you're gonna, Adam, you're gonna labor all the days of your life, and from dust you were made, and dust you're gonna become. And it says, Eve, you're gonna have greatly increased pain in childbirth. And says the serpent's going to eat dust all the days of his life. and that that God would send someone who would crush the head of the serpent, and his heel would be bruised. So, if we look at the this story, it explains a lot of what's going on here. First of all, there's no such thing as innocent people. Paul, when he's explaining in Romans, he says that all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. He said that when Adam sinned, death entered the world, and it affected every person. So there's no such thing as innocent people in the Christian world. All are guilty before God. It doesn't matter how old you are. From the moment you were conceived, he says, David says, I was conceived in iniquity. He says, there's no such thing as innocent. And, okay, now we look at Adam, okay. He ate that fruit, and his eyes were opened up. God said he was going to die. Well, we know that every man in the history of mankind has died. Up to the most that anybody's lived is, in modern times, is like 120 years old. So everybody has died physically. But there's also a component of spiritual death. And Jesus talks about this. In John chapter 3, there's a man called Nicodemus, and he came to Jesus at night, and Jesus said to him, he said, you must be born again. And Nicodemus says, how can I be born? I can't go back in my mother's womb. And Jesus was saying, truly, truly, the wind blows where it wills. But anyway, he was saying you have to be born again. That's which is born of the Spirit is spirit, and that which is born of the flesh is flesh. So he says there's a difference between the spirit and the fleshly death. So when Adam ate that fruit and his eyes are opened up, he died spiritually. There was a spiritual connection to God that was broken. That's what happens when we die. When we die, we are disconnected from our body. Our spirit is disconnected from our body. When we die spiritually, we are disconnected from God. So, when Stefan Molyneux was saying that, that all these innocent people died, it's not how it works. That's not what we're talking about. Otherwise, why did Jesus die? What was the purpose of his death? If he didn't die for our sins, then his life meant nothing. But he died for our sins, and he rose again that we could be risen with him, that we could have new life. He says when we believe in him, we become born again. So that's what kind of bothered me about this whole situation with Stefan Molyneux. And also he doesn't believe in God, but I look at the earth and I say, where else could all these trees, how could people be made? I don't believe that the earth just came into being by just accident. Nothing is made by accident. A car, a bridge, computer. Those things are not made by accident. They're designed and they're made by a mind. How could something so complex as our human body be made way more complex than a computer? How could that be made without design? I don't believe it at all. So anyway, that's a short response to Stefan Molyneux, and I hope this helps out somebody. Thanks. This is Mark, Liberty Market 222.